welcome back to Cindy's Library. And today I want to talk about Villette by Charlotte Bronte. Yes, I actually managed to finish it. So, Villette is about she's probably a teenager when we first meet her, visiting her godmother and helping her godmother to take care of a little girl that they are looking after, and also the godmother's son. And this is a rather happy-ish life, which unfortunately does not last. We are not given really any details, but Villette, or not Villette, our heroine, Lucy Snow, she finds herself under the necessity of providing for herself. And first she finds herself the companion of an old lady. But the old lady dies, and so Villette is left wondering again what to do. She decides it might be easier to find something and cheaper to live on the continent, in the area of teaching English. And so that is exactly what she does. She packs up and moves to the little town, might be closer to a city, but of Villette in Belgium, I believe. They speak French there, and Lucy has a bit of trouble with the language at first, although she manages to find a position at first as basically a nurse and governess, and then as a teacher of English. And so this is Lucy's story. Don't want to give away spoilers, although at that, the end is a bit debatable. But I can tell you the story is in 3 parts. We start with Lucy at the beginning, on a long visit to her godmother, and the people she meets there, and the old lady as her companion, and moving to Villette, and the first bit of her time there, and not really her loneliness. She does find it rather lonely. Then part 2, we see more of Lucy Snow's adventures, and adventures may be the right term since she runs into some former people that she knows, and with them her life broadens. And finally, in part 3, we get the conclusion of everything that has happened, both with Lucy towards her former acquaintances and friends, and what happens between them and Lucy and them and themselves, and Lucy and her new acquaintances from Villette. So yeah, that should give you a pretty good idea of what it is about. It's pretty long, and this Penguin edition is 550-ish pages, not including notes at the end and the introduction in the front, of course. I'm afraid that unless you know French, some of the notes are extremely helpful, given that many of the characters speak primarily, and in some cases only, French. Oh well, that was what was written down here. Beyond that, Charlotte Bronte also first wrote a book called The Professor, and Villette is clearly the mature version of The Professor. No, there seems to be less explicit males thinking about females in complicated ways, and that way it helps. The perspective is all basically from Lucy Snow's perspective. Still a little bit snobbish, realistic for the period. As for Lucy Snow herself, most people seem to either love or hate Villette. Some people think Lucy Snow is too quiet and passive of a character. I would have to disagree with that. Internally, she is not passive. And externally, she shows that she is not passive by leaving England and going to Villette to find a position in a time when women by themselves would very rarely have done such a thing. You might have a male relative help you set you up for such a thing if such was necessary, but very rarely was such a thing done. And I think what happens with Lucy is she is in extremely confined circumstances, especially at the beginning of her time with Villette. She knows no one. In many ways, she is the mercy of the headmistress of the school she ends up at, and needs to keep on her good side to keep her job. And so, is she going to say anything vocally to anyone? Why would she? She comes to understand many of the people at the school pretty well. She even has a sort of respect for the headmistress, but is she bosom friends with any of them? No. Most of the girls are silly and are younger. And as for the fellow teachers, for one reason or another, she is not very interested in them. And while the headmistress you can respect, the headmistress is not one that you become friends with exactly. So thank goodness she at least runs into some old English acquaintances. That helps her spirits greatly. There is one friendship in Villette that she does make with Professor Paul. But that's all I'll say on that subject. It is actually, when are we introduced to Monsieur Paul? I'm not sure. It's not for a while. And certainly he doesn't become a character of any significance until, well, for quite some time. But he does become quite significant. And, well, we'll leave it at that. But no, between Lucy's natural reserve, wanting to keep her job, and not finding bosom companions in most of people in the school. Why would Lucy not keep just about everything in? So I can relate to that. This is actually an excellent psychological portrait of what goes on. And like Jane Eyre, there's even a supernatural streak. This may very well be, well, that may very well be Charlotte Bronte's best written book. I don't know if it is my favorite. I still need to reread Jane Eyre. And Shirley pulled me through it a bit easier than Villette did. Still, some ways Villette may stay with me more than Shirley. So, it's definitely the better book, like I said. So yeah, I'd probably put it above Shirley, definitely above the Professor. Not sure about Jane Eyre. I'll have to reread that, maybe for Victober. As for Tenant of Wildfell Hall, Agnes Grey is probably the most enjoyable of the Bronte stories that I have read. Well, I may change my mind when I read Jane Eyre. Although I would say Villette is the better story. Well, it's not really a fair comparison. Agnes Grey is probably the shortest full novel of all the Brontes, and so to compare it to what may be the longest is not fair at all. Tenant of Wildfell Hall, I'm not sure about that one. There were parts of that enjoyable, parts of that were quite painful. Not sure which will stick more with me, Villette or the Tenant of Wildfell Hall. But that is what I think at this point. And like I said, when I get a chance to reread Jane Eyre, my thoughts may change. But I can now say that with the exception of Wuthering Heights, I've now read every major work by the Brontes. And I'm very glad I did, since I have come across some new gems to add to my repertoire. Yep, the Brontes are definitely worth reading. Anyway, that is all for today. Thank you so much for stopping by. I'd love to hear what you think of Villette. And feel free to leave comments down below. And till next time, I hope we all stay safe and healthy, and happy reading.